All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time yet again. It's your Tavern Voices time. I'm your host, Kevin King, and with me, as always, is my partner in crime, but not my partner in looting, Tyler Cralle. Good to see you, my friend.
I'm glad you distinguish between that right now. It's very, very important. I'm into more of like I like robbing when no one else is doing it. It's way too popular right now. Right. It's like, everyone's robbing now. Like I like to do it when it's not as popular. But obviously we should probably start there. And I'll just tell you, it was a surreal experience because, we've seen things happen over the last couple of decades, and there's no doubt that, they happen in the Raleighs and Charlotte and DC and everything else. But I'll tell you, it was weird to see gas canisters and flashbangs going off in downtown Wilmington. Like Wilmington, like we're the beach community.
Yeah.
Like we're the place where we just, oh man, look at all those crazy people and they're high, pressure, city work. And it's like you come here to relax. And the fact that even we had protests, I think goes to show you just how insane this is.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely insane. I mean, to be honest, even in Raleigh, it still feels weird. I mean, you see these hotbeds of like inner cities. You expect New York, Chicago, when specifically it was going on in Minneapolis where the incident happened, or back in Ferguson several years ago, and you're like, okay, this makes sense. This is where it happened. There's this like influx of energy and and outrage and everything going on because this happened in my backyard. But the pop-ups everywhere is definitely something different. And I've got friends. People move into these cities. It's very much the yuppie cool thing to do. People want to live in downtown and be able to walk around and go to all the restaurants and the shops and all the little, all the little places that gentrification brings. And people are pretty afraid the last couple nights in downtown Raleigh. And I'm sure Wilmington as well, when you've got these things going on and the police don't seem to have it under control at all.
So here's, let's start with a conspiracy theory, shall we?
Oh, absolutely.
And try and figure out how much of this is organized and how much of this is organic.
Yeah.
And now, of course, like you can go off into a bunch of different branches. But I just mean because to me, it does feel like, and here's what happened in Wilmington. So yesterday we had the big riots last night. They were mostly I don't want to classify them as riots because I think we only had like one broken window. So for the most part, it was protest. But the police showed up in force, gas canisters, flashbangs, all that stuff. But what was crazy was that leading up to it, the local NAACP, a lot of black leaders in Wilmington were like, we did not plan this protest. We did not organize it. We do not know who did. And they were telling members of the black community and allies not to show up to this thing. And so I wonder how many people were actually Wilmingtonians, how many of them are actually people who are concerned about all of this that's going on, and how much we're just sort of not. And when I say professional agitators, I don't mean people that, are getting paid by George Soros, but just people who just want to go places and mess stuff up. Like that's hey, any reason why.
Right. Your QAnon anarchist, Guy Fawkes mask. Black Lives Matters, Antifa, white national, like you name it. I get exactly what you're talking about. And I was going to ask you the same thing: is who do you think is behind it? Because there definitely is a force. I mean, you're Twitter savvy. It doesn't take long to kind of get in, follow some hashtags, and find that there are people communicating a lot of information across social media. I saw last night there were on a Twitter feed. I was trying to keep up with what was going on in downtown. I live about 20 minutes outside of town, and so I was trying to see, hey, what in the world's going on? And I kind of followed a thread and I found some people that were posting specific locations in downtown. And it was saying, hey, we've got medical equipment if you get injured while you're looting. We've got, water, supplies. We've got a vehicle to take you to the hospital. There was like a support system for the rioters. A peaceful protester is not really worried about that, right? So, There are some people now. How organized is it? I don't know. It definitely seems very. I mean, it's like every video you see, they're blaming a different group. And if all of these groups, if there was one group behind it, you wouldn't see such fragmentation. So I don't think it's highly organized. But I think there's a group of people who want to see this happen from different walks of life.
Yeah, I don't know who it is. I mean, I think it's mostly Antifa for the most part, and like I said, the problem is when you say that, it like branches off and, oh, so you think George Soros is paying these people? I'm like, no, I think they all live in their parents' basement and they don't really care about money. They want to, they want to tear capitalism down, right? They're listening, they're in their parents' basement, listening to Rage Against the Machine 24/7 and playing, whatever video game helps lead to their anarchy. And so they're like, yeah, this is great. Here's an opportunity for us to do that. And they don't care which movement they have to hijack in order to accomplish that. I mean, I'll tell you, that's my favorite thing on Twitter right now are these videos that are getting posted of black protesters berating these like white Antifa hipster kids.
The hipster,
and they're like spray painting Starbucks and they're like, hey, don't do that. We didn't tell you to do that. Stop doing that. And they have like nothing to say because normally, if you and I walked up and we're like, hey, don't spray paint that, they'd be like, you're an oppressor. You don't know what it's like. But when they have like some black protester who is telling them, hey, don't do that, they're like, they have nothing to say. They just walk away because they can't be like, hey, listen, you don't know what it's like. It's like they're the ones that's the reason the protest is happening. Yeah. So those are my favorite Twitter videos are these, black protesters. Did you see that one in DC? It was great. There was this white Antifa guy. And like I said, it was in DC and he was hammering the asphalt, trying to break it up so they can get rocks to throw at cops. And a bunch of other protesters tackled him, subdued him. And I think they took him to the cops.
Yeah.
Like,
no, I did see that. They dragged him through the streets. Yeah.
And so you have that element. And then you have, this sort of white nationalist supremacist movement, the Proud Boys, that group that, shows up and they're like, we're going to fight Antifa. And I've always argued, to me, it's like both groups solely exist to fight the other one. So if they both just disappeared, they wouldn't be needed. It's like Antifa argues we got to fight white supremacists. And then the Proud Boys are like, we got to fight Antifa. And I'm like, what if you guys both just stop showing up protests? Then we wouldn't need either of your groups. It's like they only exist because the other one exists. It's like this self-fulfilling prophecy over and over again.
And I think it's like 12 people in both camps.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I don't think, I think there's way more Antifa. I think like, for every protest, there's like, maybe like one Proud Boy for like, 100 Antifa people at these protests. This is Antifa way more than it's anything else. But other protests, it is the Proud Boys. But I hate both groups. And I think that they're just agitators and they're professional agitators who are just mad at the world. A lot of the Proud Boys are mad that, they think that, minorities are getting all this great stuff and they're not getting anything. And our society has gone way too far the other direction. I think they're wrong about that. And then you have the other group that's convinced that white supremacy still exists and still has a stranglehold or they just want to mess stuff up, but they both just want to break stuff and show up. And it's like the line from The Dark Knight, right? Some men just want to see the world burn. That's these two groups. That's all they want to do.
Yeah.
Is just burn stuff down.
Yeah. And unfortunately, they're succeeding. I mean, I think they are
burning a lot of stuff.
That's the crazy part. I mean, I was talking to some friends recently and the National Guard rolled in yesterday. And as I'm watching video clips of Bradley vehicles rolling into streets that I normally walk down casually, that bothers me a lot because as limited government people, it's like, you don't want the military on the streets. You don't want martial law. You don't want more government in response. And I think that's the weird part of this dynamic is we're not having a dialogue about the fact that it was laws and the state that caused this protest and then the subsequent outbreak. And it's being met by a lot of people who are wanting more government involvement.
Well, yeah, it's really fascinating. I actually posted this on the Tavern Voices website. There was a great article I read this morning by, let me make sure I get the guy's name right, Aris Rousinos. I'm probably butchering that, but he wrote this fascinating article.
Great linguist.
He wrote this fascinating article over at Unheard, and it basically breaks down, his opinion that all of this is happening because America is failing as a state. And he talks about globalization. He talks about, what that's caused and how COVID-19 has opened our eyes to the failures of globalism and sort of neoliberalism and this idea, or not neoliberalism, but not classical liberalism, but sort of this
in between liberalism.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's because neoliberalism I think of as being sort of where progressives are, right. But what he's talking about is sort of this idea of I guess neoconservative, this idea of we need to police the world type situation. All of this is kind of combined. And it's messed things up and people are angry. And it's very interesting because I think you have people on the far, far left who don't like police power, but at the same time, they also want the government maybe to do more to protect our economic interests. But you have people on the right that are almost making the same argument where they're mad about police power. They're mad, with this whole Donald Trump in Russia, did the DOJ, abuse its power, and they're trying to throw these people in jail in order to remove a duly elected president. But they also have talked about, hey, we need to end globalism. And I'm wondering if these two sides if someone's going to realize that these two sides have way more in common than everyone realizes, and there's way more of them than there are of the, so-called elites. And will someone be able to unite them, except for things like this, where there are still racial and social major differences between, obviously liberals and conservatives. And are those going to be enough to sort of keep them from coming together, even though they agree on foreign policy and some on economics? And I just wonder, what role this is playing in some of these protests. I mean, would this have happened 3 months ago before COVID and the 40 million job loss and the GDP tanking and everything else? I don't know. I don't know what role the economics is playing in some of these protests, but I do think it's interesting that you do see some unity on the idea of government being too powerful in this area, but not powerful enough in the other area. So it's sort of like balancing the scale.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. So you've talked about arguments made by like AOC and Trump and their similarities.
Well, yeah, remember her anger about giving New York or Amazon being given incentives by New York, which a lot of conservatives were like, yeah, we agree with you. Now, of course, her argument was kind of stupid because, she was acting like New York was just going to give them money when in reality they were just getting a tax cut. So it was based on the money that they were going to get from Amazon, and then they were going to cut money from that. So that New York wasn't losing money. They were still making money in the end, but why should they get that break when nobody else does? So her argument was kind of wrong, but the conclusion that we shouldn't be giving a giant corporation a tax break when small businesses don't get a tax break was correct. And conservatives were with her on that.
Yeah. Well, so what do you think that do you think there's going to be a dialogue from this, hopefully after some brief de-escalation of the situation, where people are going to actually talk about any of this? Like, do you think there are any rational heads that say, hey, maybe we have way too many stupid laws that target minorities, and that's why they end up in these positions? Criminal justice reform, can we talk about that? Or is it going to be just still a my government versus your government power trip?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I have no idea because, I'm not a huge fan of populism, but I do like to follow it because I think it's important because obviously it's growing in popularity within the Republican Party. And in my opinion, probably the most vocal and sort of the leader of the populist movement besides Donald Trump is Tucker Carlson on Fox News. And, he's talked about, our economic policies and what's happened to rural America, the opioid crisis, the manufacturing decline, just all of these issues, and the elites have gotten rich off all of this. He talks about this a lot, but the one thing that Tucker has been not in favor of has been criminal justice reform. And he's criticized the president for some of these measures and actually still believes in sort of the traditional, Republican argument about law and order. And so I don't know where the movement is on that. It seems like they're kind of there because Trump was so pro it, but I'm not sure where populism is on law and order, because I feel like they've seen the damage it can do with the way the DOJ, treated the Trump administration. And they're like, wow, the government can do that. And it's like, yeah. And a lot of minorities have been like, yeah, they do that every day to a lot of people. And so I think there's been kind of a wake up call, but I'm not sure how strong it is. And what's interesting about this case though, is, unlike the other situations where, Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, other sort of shooting incidences that deal with a minority, this one, there doesn't seem to be any disagreement on. I mean, everyone seems to be like, yeah, that guy should go to jail for probably the rest of his life. And so there is no real disagreement, which is kind of interesting because I don't think we've seen that in the last, I don't know. I mean, have we ever seen it? I don't know. I mean, I feel like this is the first time we've ever seen sort of a unanimous, maybe not unanimous. There are some still idiots I've seen post. They're like, we need to see the video or whatever they're arguing. But it seems like we're all in agreement that what happened to him was bad.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the interesting part is that you don't see that disagreement. I think you see a lot of people thinking this is a pretty open and shut case, and nothing was done about it. So it does look bad that regardless of their intentions, this guy may still have not been in trouble if it hadn't have been for the outrage over the video, if it hadn't have gone viral. But my question maybe to this, and I can ask you because you're barely Southern. Barely.
I was born below the Mason-Dixon line.
I know.
Officially.
That's a loose territory.
Oh no, my microphone's coming undone, Kevin. All right, so you were talking about the South. I was barely a Southerner. Begin there.
Yes, so you were barely a Southerner, so I think you might have a good perspective on this. But and I'm glad that I can do this again, and you didn't hear it, and nobody else heard the first time because I had to stretch this out for like 2 minutes while you're dangling a microphone. No, but so my question is a lot of these incidents that have been in the mainstream over the last several years. I mean, between, like you said, Trayvon, you had Ferguson, you've had all these incidents. It seemed to be this Southern thing. They kept, the Southern racism. We need to tear down the statues. It's been this one narrative. And now you have Minnesota, which is not really known for its racist tendencies. So my question is, has it, obviously there's racism, very obvious statement, but is there something bigger here that we've just not been having a conversation about? Is there an authority problem? Is there a police dominance? Are there laws that just disproportionately affect minority communities, but it's not the racism of the 60s? Is it the same thing? Because I feel like we're just not having a dialogue about a complexity. It's just like, oh, it's racism. And we're talking about white people, black people, and racism, white people, black people, racism, instead of a more complex discussion.
Well, have you watched that new thing on Netflix, the Trial by Media? It's like a mini series, and it's like 4 or 5 high profile cases and the way the media covered them. The first one's fascinating. It's about that Jenny Jones case where the guest on her show killed another guest on the show, and they blamed it on Jenny Jones' show. And
sort of that
First Amendment. And this is back like, I want to say mid 90s, I guess, when the Jenny Jones show was popular. But one of them was Bernard Gertz. He was the guy that, remember, shot the black guys in the subway, and it became this big issue about, crime in New York. And I mean, what's funny is that, you mentioned it all being the South. For the 80s and the 90s, most of the police shootings were in New York. I mean, this wasn't a police shooting, but you had a shooting. Everyone talked about race. And then, of course, I remember the famous one, which I think is also one of the Trial by Media ones, where remember that guy got shot like 41 times in front of his house by the police, and they just all unload their clips into him. And so for a while there, most of the issues that we saw, and it was why, because crime was really, it's kind of where crime is worse. And what's interesting is over the last 20 years, places like New York City, and obviously, Chicago would be removed from this because they have a huge problem, but places like DC, New York, are almost unrecognizable with regards to the crime that they used to have, and now they don't. I mean, they still have crime, but not as what it used to be. And what's interesting is that, so now you're hearing arguments about the gentrification of these places, right? So all of a sudden, all these different people move in. Now, usually when you say gentrification, people think white, but really it just means, for the most part, affluent people moving into an area and changing that area. And there are negatives and, downsides. The negatives are housing prices go up, and you see all these new stores open up and everything else, but then it becomes kind of unaffordable to live in that place. And you see that in most major places. What's interesting about COVID is people have said, could that come to an end where all of a sudden people are now working from home? They can work anywhere they want. And so why live in New York City, which is just like insane. And a lot of it's because a lot of these stores and these, some of the things, mom and pop shops are the ones that are the most at risk of going under. And so what could happen is all of these like independent shops go under in New York, and all they're replaced by big box places, or at least sort of subsidiaries of big box places. And then all of a sudden, what's the point of living in New York City? Like, it's like, it's all the arbors, like Target, like a small Target, or like Dollar General, or whatever they put in. And it's like, well, why? I can get that anywhere. And so it's interesting to see what happens because, yeah, I think the reason why we hear it all in the South now is because a lot of these northern places, their crime rate's not what it used to be. I mean, obviously you still see it in Chicago, and I think that's why it's become a Southern thing. But what's happening? All these people are moving to the South now, and all of a sudden places like Raleigh and Charlotte are becoming these. I mean, Charlotte's now the 15th biggest city in the country, and so I think we're going to see a major change. And so all of a sudden we could start hearing about police shootings again in New York, and I think it's just more of a shifting thing now. How do you solve this clear issue? I think you mentioned it earlier. This sort of militarization of police has not been a good thing for the general population.
No, not at all. And I guess that's, kind of what I was bringing up is that I feel like there was and maybe I'm just sensitive to this from being from the South and feeling like there's just always that condescension, of the elites, the media, or what it's like, the racist, even implicit racism of growing up somewhere and the statues and the Confederate flag and all of these things. And they just talk about like, it's even if it's not a spoken thing, there's just this intrinsic racism in the South. And I feel like that's just not, like you said, 80s and 90s. Like there's a lot of police violence and different situations that have happened in different geographic locations. And I don't think it's because someone was born in the South and they didn't vocalize their abdication of implicit racism.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like you run into that issue where the problem is that Southern heritage is complicated, as everyone here knows. And so you saw that in South Carolina with the Manual Church was shot up by that white kid. And that's when it ended up leading to the Confederate flag being removed from the state capitol.
Right.
And, it's kind of crazy because you think about it. And to me, it's almost like smoking, where you ever watch like a movie and everyone's just like smoking inside and you're like, man, I can't believe like we used to do that. Like, it just seems so insane. And if you were to go to someone now and be like, did you know that like 4 years ago, the Confederate flag was still flying in the state and the South Carolina state capitol? They probably would be like, no way. There's no way. It's like, I saw someone tweet on, or I saw someone put on Twitter that their favorite thing is Generation Z people seeing Tropic Thunder and realizing that Robert Downey Jr. did blackface. Yeah. And they're like, I can't believe it, because you're right, the movie's only like 12 years old, but it seems just like there's no way you could do that today. And it's kind of crazy to remember that there was all of this stuff that's heritage of the South, but to a lot of people, especially Black people, they look at it and they don't see the same thing. Mm-hmm. And it's like, man, how was that Confederate flag flying at the state capitol till like 3 years ago? Like, it doesn't seem like that was possible.
Yeah, and it's funny. I think the best example of that is comedy, and you've had people like I think Jerry Seinfeld's probably the most prominent, who's come out and just talked about how a lot of people get outraged at the same type of jokes now that were hilarious 10 years ago. And I was watching Entourage again recently, and you watch it and you're like 2001, 2002 on that show, just some of the comments and the cuts, the jabs at each other and all that. I'm like, you couldn't do that now. That would not be.
Oh, especially not a Hollywood show.
Yeah.
Hollywood, no one would go on that show from Hollywood if they were making jokes about being gay and all that other stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy, and that was just normal. So like society keeps moving and changing and tweaking, and I think it's important to not try to look at everything through the new enlightened viewpoint. Like,
well,
it was what it was.
Speaking of comedy, did you see that Chris Rock joke that's making the rounds on Twitter?
Which one?
Where he's talking about the bad apples, the cops being bad apples.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, some jobs can't have bad apples. He's like pilots. And he's like, American Airlines can't get on TV and say like, well, most of our pilots land. Yeah. And I mean, it's spot on, because there are some jobs that can have bad apples. He's right. And cops is one of those jobs. What's not being said, and this is where I think you're going to see a divide, is one of the reasons why the police keep these bad people on the force is because of the unions. Democrats don't want to admit it, but unions, this is kind of the way it works, right? Like, it's sort of this herd mentality that you sort of like this whole idea of buffalo herds, right? You only move as fast as the slowest buffalo. Well, the fastest buffalo doesn't need protection because it's going to beat everybody. really what the herd is about is helping the slow buffalo. And that's the problem with the unions. The unions do the most at protecting the worst people in that profession, like bad teachers, bad police officers. They're the ones who are getting all this protection, and it shouldn't happen. But the problem is that how do you stop that? The reason they get that protection is because these ironclad employment contracts, they negotiate those, and that's what they want. They want it to be hard to fire people. The problem is when you make it hard to fire someone, it's hard to fire them. And I don't think Democrats want to have that conversation. But if they want to know one of the reasons why, police unions.
Yeah, no. And also I think part of it probably too is the politicization. Well, because
it's all right. This morning I couldn't say anarchist. I was like, I got stuck. It was like the most embarrassing. So, the politicization is also one of those words. But yeah, this morning I couldn't say anarchist. It's just one of those days. So
well, that makes me feel better. But you look at these cities that have had awful police chief changes because they're generally hired by the city, and the city is made up of political actors. So you look at Asheville, they had 2 or 3 back-to-back not sheriffs, but police chiefs that they hired that had either been fired under mysterious means from their last job. They get up there, their children are involved in scandals. You saw the stories. There were issues with just Asheville, and that's like a Caucasian neoliberal happy land, right? It's not a hot spot of all these other issues we're talking about. And so I think that's part of it is you get people in these positions that they got there because they climbed the ranks, not necessarily on merit, but on who their friends are. It's cronyism, right? And that's where we can start to have more complex conversations. Like I said, a lot of people, and I even think I see, because I think for a long time, anyone on the right was so pro-police, could do no wrong. And it's funny you mentioned teachers and cops, because I saw a tweet before we came on the show of someone kind of making that argument, saying the left has teachers and the right has cops, and they both have issues for the exact same reason. And what you just brought up is that the unions tend to protect them. And he said, we need to get rid of the bottom 10% of both professions and make them better because they're insulated. They have a huge drag on the economy just due to the high amount of money we spend on both. But I think that people are starting to loosen up a little bit to ideas, and I credit shows like Live PD, for instance. I don't know if you watch that much. I've kind of been addicted
I've
to
seen
it.
some of it, not that much. They filmed in Wilmington.
They did at the beginning, and I didn't catch. I didn't start watching it at that point. I caught on about 2 years ago, and I would say I've seen most episodes since then. It's kind of our weekend, frozen pizza hangout, watch Live PD sort of tradition, my wife and I, and it's really opened my eyes a little bit, because I think part of it is you see that there are really dumb laws and the cops are put into really awful positions. You see a lot of these shootings of criminals against cops. They get put in really awful positions, but it's because they're having to patrol in bad neighborhoods. They're pulling someone over who knows what, they're a felon on the run. They open fire. They had an officer on a couple weeks ago who had been shot in the face and the chest and all this stuff just from pulling a car over for a broken taillight out or something crazy like that. So you see these incidents, they're put in these awful positions. So it makes their life extremely hard. So I agree that you can't just see a clip of a video and instantly think that the police were in the wrong, right? At the same time, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say there was that video. There's a great video on Reddit. It's not great, but it just shows you how terrifying it is to be a cop, where this guy's like on the phone and the cop's like coming behind him. And he goes, show me your hands, sir. Show me your hands. And the guy's just kind of looking at him on the phone. And all of a sudden he just pulls out this semi-automatic and just unloads. And the cop, I don't even know if he had his gun out. I think he went at a taser, and the cop is hit, and he runs to his cop car and he's like, I'm hit. And then I think he passed out, and 20 seconds later, right? The adrenaline hit him. Yeah. And he almost died. And it just would to show you, that's all it takes is that 2 seconds. Listen, to me, being a cop is like being a soldier, and that there are people that are just wired differently. I am not wired like that. I commend people that are, people that are I'm going to put my life on the line. And the problem is once again, the militarization of police has put a lot of our police officers in a mindset. When you show up, at a situation and you're rolling in there with a tank and you got your, gear on and you got your assault. I mean, you got like, you're ready for an assault. If it doesn't happen, you almost feel let down. And so it's almost like they're just itching to do that because they're like, I want to use all this cool equipment that I got from the military. And that's where they get it from. It's military that is given to these police departments.
Yeah.
And so that is a major issue. And then on top of it, you also, it's interesting. I was talking this morning on my show about the Milgram experiment, that famous experiment back in the 60s done by, I think was it Steve Milgram? Where
Steve Milgram Band. I know that.
Yeah. And it was basically what he did was, and this is what I think happened, because a lot of people have been asking this question, why didn't anyone stop this cop? I know I get he's a cop, but he was still murdering someone in front of everybody. Why didn't anyone stop it? And it's this Milgram experiment is basically where they put two people in different rooms, and the one person was shocking the other person. The other person was being shocked was an actor. And every time they'd shock him, he'd scream in agony, stop, stop, stop. And then eventually he'd stop screaming, assuming that the shock, because every time they were upping the voltage, that assuming the guy passed out or maybe died. And the people would turn to the proctor and say, hey, I think that guy's not doing okay. You should go check on him. And they'd say, continue the experiment. And he'd say, okay, well, you going to take liability for what happens to this guy? And they'd say, yes. And they go, okay. And they would continue doing it. And it was like 95% of people continued with the experiment, even if they thought they may have killed that guy because someone in authority was telling them to do it. And so there is a problem that arises by us looking at cops almost in this sort of, authoritarian way where, well, if they're doing it, they must have a reason. And it gives them this power that sometimes they obviously use for bad. So I think the militarization of police and the fact that we just always assume, and rightfully so, we give cops the benefit of the doubt, but it also creates, as they say, right, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. They do have a lot of power, and it does lead to sort of, and that's why you need oversight. And that's why when people are bad, they need to be fired because, 1-2 people can rot. What's someone pointed out that phrase, one bad apple ruins the bunch, I think is the phrase. And that's all it takes is 1 or 2 bad cops in a unit can hurt the whole union. And if everyone else starts acting that same way. And so I think that's one of the big problems that we need to solve.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that it's complex. A lot of people think that we can just overthink and just basically tweet out our genetic history, right? And what I mean by that is thousands of years of evolution. And you talked about like getting hyped up for battle or whatever. That's what you had to do. If your town was under threat or there was something going on, you had adrenaline spikes. You had to fight. That's why you had that warrior mentality.
Fight or flight.
Right. So like the Spartans didn't get geared up for war and then, and then not follow through with it. Right. So, there's a lot of biological factors that come into play in society. And
there's a reason kids play war. There's something that's like adrenaline hyping about getting suited up for battle. It's like doing anything that you like to do, right? Just you're getting ready for it. And then if it doesn't happen, there's like this, it's very disappointing that it didn't happen. And so they get hyped up. I did want to say one thing real quick before we run out of time. Neoliberalism is in fact exactly what I thought it was. It's sort of classical liberalism. Neo-progressivism is this new kind of progressivism that's different than sort of like the old Democratic Party where it's like all these crazy social justice things and everything like that. So I wanted to correct ourselves before someone emails me or says I knew it sounded familiar, but I didn't want to commit.
Hate mail.
Always commit.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I wanted to say, because I had 2 parts to the police discussion, is they get put in really bad situations. That was like part A.
Yes.
Part B is that, and I've kind of mentioned this a little bit, but they have, all of these, all of these laws have built a system that a lot of people never get out of. And I see that from watching Live PD. You have these people who have been arrested, they've been on probation, they didn't go to court, so then they have a warrant, so then they get this and they get pulled over and they've got to tell that out because their car is worth about $50. So then they get pulled over again and they had a warrant for not showing up, so now they have another ticket and they have this, and you get this cycle of just never getting out of it, and that affects people of all races. You see a lot of these very poor white places in middle America that struggle, with this. And I think that's what you get is you get these people that are trapped down by the system. And so that's where you look into this criminal justice reform is saying, does it make sense to take this 18-year-old and make them a criminal for the next 60 years? Or is there something better that we can do? Can we let things slide?
Yeah, no, that's true. And actually, that's a fascinating debate among some people I've talked to where, we had this conversation about what's happened in rural America. Like back 50 years ago when rural America was, this bustling hub and it was all these great things were happening. And now, of course, it's not. And everyone says, oh, well, it's globalization. And then there are people that say, well, actually, it was the rot of society that then caused all of that. And so that's the big question. The chicken or the egg. Is it in these cases where society has sort of put these people in a bad place, or have they put themselves in that bad place? And then because of it, it sort of continues to perpetuate. That's one of the big questions that we need to answer, because that would solve a lot of these problems, because that seems to be the big divide where people say, once you're caught in the system, you're never going to get out of it. So how do you keep people from getting into that system? And, because, the lot has been written about this, that if you look at, going back to what we were talking about, sort of this horseshoe theory, that people on the far right and far left, the social dynamics are the same, right? Where it's people don't go to college, people that come from single parent families, they end up working, low wage jobs. They have children out of wedlock. I mean, just it's drug use, alcohol abuse. I mean, the symptoms are exactly the same. The geographical locations change, but the symptoms are exactly the same. And so once again, is society causing them to do that? Like, have the inner cities, has rural America been forgotten by the elites, or have they created this own place for themselves? That's the big question. And no one knows the answer to, because both sides say different things. One side says it's society that caused it. The other side says, no, if they would start turning it around, it would then turn around for them. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the answer is that there is no answer.
Well, there's an answer. We just don't know what it is. There's always an answer, Kevin.
It's often been said, if there's no solution, there's not a problem. So
real quick before we're out of time.
Yeah.
Should President Trump address the nation? I kind of feel like it's weird. That he hasn't done that yet.
It is weird. I think it's weird that the people pointing that out are doing it politically.
Sure, there's a political component, but I just don't know why he hasn't done it. I mean, you think he's like, well, I'm going to get criticized if I do it, so I do it? Because it seems like this is like a great opportunity for him to come on and say and give one of those speeches that sort of makes him look like a uniter instead of a divider, which is a good thing for any president to do. So, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any downside to the president giving a speech. And I guess unless he really bungles it, which I don't know how you would do.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, if anyone could, he probably could, but I am
Obama could do it.
For someone who likes to be in front of the television or to tweet or whatever. He has been pretty quiet about it. So I don't
think it's gonna do much. It never does. Obama didn't do much when he spoke to the nation, but it's just sort of like everyone just sort of, you're used to hearing the president say, "Hey, I know what's going on. I hear what's going on, and and we need to unite as a country," or whatever you say in your speeches. But I just thought it was weird that he hasn't spoken yet.
It is weird, but I think he should.
I thought he was going to do it Sunday night, so we'll see if he does it this week. He's got to be at some point. You just don't do it. Like you pass the expiration date where you just don't address the nation now.
Yeah.
So hopefully there's peace out in North Carolina. I think I'm already hearing rumors there could be some problems down here, but I think pretty much everywhere is going to have a curfew tonight. So hopefully next time we talk, we'll be able to talk about happier things.
I hope so, because I think there's a lot more layers to this. So I think it'll be interesting to start to pull it back. You see sort of failures in leadership. And I know there are a lot of people attacking, which is funny. You had tweeted about conservatives attacking the media. And I see a lot of neo-progressives, as you would call them, also attacking the media for not showing what they think they should be showing of the protests and riots and all of that. So the media is under attack from both extremes, once again showing the commonality.
That's true though. However, I do think the journalists are just showing what people are doing. I mean, and I know, and I get you be angry if like your protest was hijacked and they were only showing the people that hijacked the protest. But I mean, that's what's happening in these protests, and it's up to the people organizing these things to get those people out.
And unfortunately, CVS on fire generally attracts more viewers than someone putting a sign in the park. So
no, I mean, that's true. I mean, there's no doubt that sensationalism plays a role in all of this, but what I want to see is exactly what happened. And people get mad at me when I make this comparison, but I'm not making it to say that they're comparable, but in that, protesting is great. I think protesting, a spontaneous protest has a value, but after that, it's then solely either the courts or legislation. And if you've noticed, the reopen groups have had amazing success in the courts. I know they're suing right now for the gyms. They're probably going to win. That has done so much more than the reopen protest ever did. They didn't do anything. In fact, in some cases, they made the group look bad. Mm-hmm. And so now's the time for us to start talking about what do we do legislative wise, and watch this guy have his day in court. That's where the actual action takes place. And the quicker we get there, the better it will be.
Yeah. I totally agree. Well, I think we have pushed our time despite the great mic incident of 2020.
The mic incident of 2020. Well, anything that can go wrong in 2020 will go wrong. So there we go. Even my mic fell apart.
Well, while you're getting the outro music ready to go, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, because that's where we're going to be posting all of the great video of us and our amazing hair, hat or not, from now on. So Tyler, don't set anything on fire tonight, and I'll see you next week.